Vosh and Dave Smith had a debate recently on Ukraine, and I don't like Vosh's performance. I thought it was absolutely too soft. It was bullshit. And what I heard from lurking on his subreddit is that Vosh didn't even prepare. So Dave Smith basically survives an easily losable debate. He was not supposed to win this debate. So we're going to watch this and just debunk all the foolishness that Dave Smith says, because I'm tired of Dave Smith.
Strikes with U.S. weapons inside of Russia. There was the strike that Russia is blaming the U.S. for in Crimea just over the last couple of days. So I think probably a good way to begin is to give you both kind of an opening statement here. And I'll start with you, Vosh. Should the U.S. continue funding this war? And then we'll go to Dave on the same question. But go ahead first, Vosh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the idea on a systemic level of rewarding Russia for invading a neighbor. I just think, generally speaking, that's bad for global relations, very destabilizing. I think it's important that we support any system that prevents that from happening, and not exactly a novel position. With regards to the recent development and strikes inside Russian territory, I actually think that this is, in the long run, going to be a good move for peace, just because the previous U.S. doctrine, which seemed to be provide just enough weapons to stall the war, but not decisively concluded. I think that was actually the worst possible decision. You know, if Russia did an sort of early conquest, or if Ukraine decisively held its territory, those both end the war relatively quickly. But just interminably stalling it right at the river, I don't think that would have been good in the long run. Hopefully, these increased attacks inside Russian territory, mostly, of course, the refineries that they're using to sort of gin up their war economy. Hopefully that serves as an effective long-term deterrent. I don't want this conflict to continue. I don't want civilians to die. I mean, obviously we'll have to see how things play out.
Dave, go ahead.
Well, of course, we should stop funding this. We never should have been funding this war to begin with. I think that in the original Cold War, which I still regard as one of the worst U.S. policies in modern American history, that did so much to ruin our country, and not to mention, things like the Vietnam War and the millions of people who died in it. But at least in the original Cold War, I think there was always a healthy respect for the risks involved. And that all of us all sane people should recognize that the greatest priority in human history is that the United States of America and Russia do not go to war. And this was something that people in the old Cold War were very respectful of and aware of. The difference in this new Cold War environment is that no one in the upper echelons of power in America seems to have any respect for this threat, and any respect for, you could think to yourself, well, maybe this will work out in a positive way, that the U.S. is green-lighting attacks inside of Russia. Or perhaps it could be an absolute disaster. And when I say we're playing with fire, it's an understatement. We're flirting with potentially the most disastrous thing that could happen to the human species. If America is to have any role in this conflict, it should be working toward a peaceful negotiation. And in fact, the American role and the Western role has been to kill peaceful negotiations from the beginning of this war and to prolong the fighting. I think that, as John Mearsheimer said back in 2014, the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path, has turned out to be the most accurate prediction on this entire conflict. And essentially, I think since the fall of the Soviet Union, American foreign policy, and just keep in mind, American foreign policy in the Clinton administration and in the W. Bush administration and Obama's administration, these are the same people who are in charge of the Middle East. And in fact, the neoconservatives were very focused on NATO expansion back in the 90s. You can go read the Project for a New American Century documents. And the same people who totally blundered foreign policy in the Middle East have totally blundered foreign policy in Europe, provoking Vladimir Putin and the Russians at every turn, leading to this awful place that we're in. That is certainly, if you care about the Ukrainians at all, has been more of a disaster for the Ukrainian people than anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Smith is he's in a different world. This foolishness about, politicians today don't respect the danger of Russia. Politicians today are playing with fire. No, they're trying to put out a fire. Let go of this false reality of a peace deal. You're not getting one. The reason why there's no peace deal is because Russia doesn't know how to keep them. The Budapest Memorandum, broken. Minsk 1, broken significantly, mostly by Russia. Minsk 2, torn apart by both sides. Oh, what's the other one? The other one where Russia agreed to honor NATO. The NATO-Russia Founding Act, signed in 1997. This nation is incapable of signing and honoring any peace deals. That is the reason why the West and Ukraine are not interested in a peace deal. I don't understand why people who are pro-Russia or in favor of Ukraine somehow not being a part of NATO or somehow appeasing Russia, you think there are deals that can be made. My question to Dave Smith is, how many deals does Vladimir Putin get to break before you realize, yeah, we are at that stage? We are at the shit has gotten real stage. Stop believing in this delusional fantasy that the West provoked Russia. We provoked them when? When the Ukrainians of their own free will ejected Yakunovich and sent him packing to Russia? That's our fault? Even though you can't even prove that. Somehow you believe that no matter what happens, the sole priority should be appeasement. Appease, 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 appease. We've already learned from World War II that appeasement does not work. It didn't work with Adolf Hitler. It didn't work. I don't know why libertarians, conservatives, anti-establishment people, all of you guys are plagued with this fantasy that if you just appease Vladimir Putin enough, if you just try your best to give him what he wants, when he wants it, when he's threatening the stability of Europe and the world, surely the problem will eventually just go away. All Vladimir Putin has to do is write peace deal on a piece of paper, and Dave Smith falls for it every single time.
And Dave, Vosh made a point that I think you hear a lot from defenders of U.S. support for the Ukrainian war, and that is you can't allow other countries, you can't reward other countries for invading other countries. You just can't do that. We can't have that. What's the response to that? We can't have that argument.
Well, I mean, first, I would just point out how absurd it is that after the last 20 years of terror wars, somehow the United States of America still gets to put itself in the position of global peacemaker, as if our major concern is that bigger nations can bully smaller nations. I mean, over the last 20 years, there's been no greater purveyor of violence than the United States of America, who has imposed its will on tiny, helpless nations across the world. As far as that, yeah, it's not good that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. And yes, certainly that's something we don't want to see. My argument would be that America and the West more broadly had many opportunities, many off-ramps to put this fire out or at least calm it down. And at every single turn, poured more gasoline on this fire. That ultimately resulted in the invasion in 2022.
The fact that Dave Smith cannot see the difference between invading Iraq and Afghanistan and Putin's constant annexation of other people's countries is crazy to me. Vladimir Putin has a history of annexing nation states or annexing parts of their territory and moving in ethnic Russians. We call that colonialism. I know people like to call Iraq neocolonialism, Afghanistan neocolonialism. But the reality is Russia engages in literal colonialism. They invade your country, annex it, and then they move in a bunch of ethnic Russians into that territory to make it legitimately their own. To make sure that enough of the population is ethnically and linguistically Russian to where it makes it really, really difficult to take that land back. The idea that there's a similarity between these two is ridiculous. One is significantly worse than the other. Vladimir Putin is not just invading Ukraine and forcing them to do things at gunpoint. He is trying to de-Ukrainianize Ukraine and to Russify Ukraine. He wants to pull them into the sphere of Russia. He wants to change their culture, their language. He wants to Russify Ukraine. He basically wants to engage in cultural erasure, trying to act like the United States, because of Iraq and Afghanistan, are somehow or another unqualified to say, hey, this Vladimir Putin thing really isn't all that cool. Like, trying to act like these two things are the same goes to show, like, the foolishness we're dealing with. Furthermore, it begs the question, whose side are you on geopolitically? Because I hate to say it, and people aren't going to like what I'm going to say, but geopolitics is all about whose side are you on, because everyone's playing dirty. Everyone is playing dirty. Some playing dirtier than others. Russia definitely plays a dirtier game than the US. We know this is true. Everyone's playing dirty. Whose team are you for? The United States of America and its allies, or Russia? And then we come back to this same false narrative that the United States had an opportunity to stop this. No, we didn't. The first invasion of Ukraine was founded on bull. The Ukrainians, of their own free will, expelled Yanukovych. Vladimir Putin took it upon himself to invade Ukraine illegally. The United States may have been involved in that, but that still does not give Vladimir Putin the right to do so. That's just not how this works. The reality is the Ukrainian people, of their own free will, wanted to be as far away from Russia as politically possible. Vladimir Putin decided they don't have the right to do that and invaded their country and killed thousands of people. The answer on how to solve this problem is so obvious. It's so obvious. Vladimir Putin is wrong on every single turn here. And to make matters worse, like I said before, Vladimir Putin does not honor deals.
Yeah, so Vosh, how can the U.S. say with a straight face that it's not okay for other countries to invade smaller countries?
Well, I think it's kind of a cowardly non-argument, because I'm not arguing in favor of the moral superiority of the United States. That'd be a ridiculous position for me to take. It's not football. We're not taking sides like, waving banners. There are two levels to this when it comes to...
You do have to take sides. I want to make this abundantly clear. In geopolitics, you are on a team. At some point, you put down the, hey, that's not fair thing, and you put that down and you play to win. That's just the game. Swear to God. Like, if I were in a room full of people in the State Department and everybody was, that's not fair, that's not fair, I would be terrified. Like, oh my God, my leaders are they're all bitches, they're all whole ass niggas. I don't want them in charge of me. I want leaders who know what time it is when the time is right.
Agency. We're concerned about the broader socioeconomic and geopolitical context that led to where we are now. And that goes back to the Cold War and even earlier. If we listen to Putin's justifications for the invasion, it goes back to the borders of the Russian Empire, And then there's like the immediate decision making. We mustn't remove agency from the equation. Russia invaded, by Putin's own words, in a sort of territorial land grab. The idea that it was entirely because of a response to Western aggression or NATO posturing is ridiculous and ahistorical. But that doesn't mean the West isn't responsible for helping to create the situation we're in now. We have to balance these two justifications. Our arrogance after the end of the Cold War, the fact that rather than reaching out to Russia as a potential future ally, we ostracized, with the shock therapy, the sort of economic devastation of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet states. These contributed to an environment in which future conflict was inevitable. It was reprehensible on the part of the Western governments to participate in this. Look today at the divide between former West and Eastern Germany. I mean, the reason that East Germany is voting so heavily for the AfD is in large part because they see it as a rejection of the doctrine of the West that left them behind after reunification. These should all be taken into account. And we must acknowledge that Putin is a fascist who did a territorial land grab. Those two facts don't contradict each other. They work together to create a complete narrative. With regards to the invasion now, I agree we have to take the threat from Russia seriously. And by that, I mean, we don't want this to scale out infinitely. We don't want this to turn into a global war. That's something we have to take seriously. At the same time, we have to acknowledge Russia does too. And their constant threats of nuclear war, the fact that they started this invasion, the fact that they have been posturing and acting aggressive towards Finland, towards the Baltic states, even like ramping up aggression towards the rest of Western Europe, we must consider again their agency. Now, I think that in the long run, there is a very deleterious consequence to creating an incentive structure where Putin gets to boost his national rep, his prestige, with a successful land grab in Ukraine. I think it would have been disastrous if he could have just marched west and taken the territory, because it would have reaffirmed and rewarded all the worst possible behaviors from him. That doesn't mean I think that we should sort of do a victory lap around Russia. Cold War II, let's win, let's trounce them in Ukraine. I do think that we're in a tough situation because we can't just magically make Russia, I guess, a democracy or a country less incentivized to invade its neighbors or reclaim historical territory. It's a difficult question, which is why I don't like simple answers.
So, Dave,
to push behind Vosh's point here, I need people to understand Russia's on a different level. The United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, yes. But I need y'all to understand, Russia threatens nuclear war every month. I want to introduce you guys. I can't show it on the screen right now, but I want to tell you guys about one of my favorite characters in this entire storyline. Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia. This is an individual who threatens to blow up the entire Earth probably every month. Swear to God. If you go on any Reddit post about Dmitry Medvedev, you'll see Redditors laughing about how this is Medvedev's 100th, 200th threat. Dmitry Medvedev 4 months ago told Romania, "You are not even really a country." Now, where have we heard this before? We've heard this rhetoric before about, you guessed it, Ukraine. So, before, like, they're already like letting us know, like, hey guys, like, we're thinking of invading, we're probably going to invade Romania next. They're not even a country to us. They're not even sovereign to us. This is the kind of language the former president of Russia is using. Imagine if Barack Obama was talking about Russia ain't shit. Russia ain't no real country. We gonna do this. We gonna blow this up. We gonna do that. Bruh. When people try to equate the United States and Russia morally, there is no comparison. Yes, Russia is as evil as they're portrayed in all the video games. Yes, they're that unhinged. Yes, I didn't believe it until this war has proven to me that yes, they really are that unhinged. Yes.
Actually, here's an interesting point that Vaush just raised about the beginning of the war. And, you know, if we may all agree, correct me if I'm wrong, that we all think it would have been bad if Putin had indeed marched into Kiev and took all of Ukraine, et cetera. But that leads us to the question, Dave, of how much U.S. involvement, if any, was just. If we agreed that it was good for the U.S. to perhaps prevent the Russian capture of Kiev, et cetera, at what point did it become too much? At what point is the support no longer just or moral? How do you respond to that, Dave?
I think that the point that you could start at a lot of different points. I think the first round of NATO expansion was unjust and was unnecessarily provocative of the Russians. I'm not exactly sure what Vaush is referring to as like a cowardly non-argument. I simply was directly responding to Ryan's point. If you have a serial killer who's killed far more people than another serial killer, and they claim that they're trying to stop a serial killer because they're so against killing, it's reasonable to point out that no, this is in fact not what's motivating U.S. foreign policy, that no, the butcherers of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Somalia and Libya and Yemen are not actually motivated by some sense of we can't let big guys pick on little guys. Let's have an honest conversation about what's really motivating this policy. And it has been, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, to increase the power of the American empire. And
this man is delusional. Yes, it's very possible for the U.S. to be like, hey, yeah, we did all these crazy things, but it's probably a bad idea if other countries do the same thing. This is called foreign policy. Yes. Do I believe it's possible for the U.S. to intervene and invade all these other countries, and then when they see Russia do it, say, we don't like that? Yes, it's very possible. Do I also believe it's very possible that there are people in the United States government who did not like Iraq or Afghanistan, who might be anti-Russia invasion of Ukraine? Yes. Yes, these things are very possible. Very possible. And it's never that simple. The invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban were hiding and abetting and aiding Osama bin Laden. Of course we went into Afghanistan. They wouldn't give him up. Obviously we went there. Iraq, that's another story. That was a whole BS war. But it's always funny to me when people like Dave Smith try to play this game of America and Russia are totally the same when it comes to how they engage in brutal foreign policy. No. If America shows up to your country, it's going to be hell on earth. When Russia shows up to your country, it's their country now. There is no end. It's not over. There's no finish. Okay? It's theirs now. They're colonizing you. We didn't set up, like, Americans weren't settling in Afghanistan. We probably would have been more successful if we had engaged in that kind of disgusting behavior. Americans weren't setting up shop there. Americans weren't setting up shop in Iraq. We tried to nation build with soldiers and only soldiers. It doesn't work that way. But we tried. Trying to make these two things seem the same is ridiculous. And then we come back to the NATO expansion nonsense again. Dave Smith. Russia agreed to honor NATO's right to expand. I need people to understand something. NATO is not an empire. NATO is a defensive military alliance organization in which nation states of their own free will can choose to join. And usually what happens is these nation states are like telling NATO, hey, we want to be a part of this. It's not us forcing them or dragging them against their will. We say, hey, if you want to be a part of us, you can. And guess what? Russia already agreed to honor this. They already agreed. You can look it up. Again, I quote this document because it is the holy grail of this entire conversation. The NATO-Russia Founding Act. There is no getting around the fact that Russia agreed to honor this. Just like all their other agreements that they have a really hard time honoring. It's ridiculous that Dave Smith knows nothing about this. Dave Smith thinks he could just keep saying, again, guys, NATO expansion, NATO expansion. Sorry, Russia agreed to honor and respect the right of former Soviet states to join any alliance that they please to. You cannot continue to keep pulling on this. And Voss should have prepped. Voss should have prepped. If Voss had properly prepped, he would know and understand that Russia already agreed to honor this. But because Voss allegedly did not prep, he's in a bad spot.
Russia has always been seen as a force that's outside of the American empire. That's what's been motivating American foreign policy. This is what we're living through here is largely the neoconservative doctrine. It was the worst thing that ever happened in the history of our country is that after we became probably the first ever true global superpower, about 10 years later, the neoconservatives got control of our foreign policy. And this was their plan from the very beginning. So no, I don't think America should have been involved in Ukraine at all. And I certainly don't think that that anything we've done has done anything except make this situation much worse and much, much more dangerous, because now you are experiencing a proxy war with the two biggest nuclear superpowers. I don't think saying any of that is reducing things down to simplistic worldview. And
yes, it is. Oh my God, it's not a proxy war. When someone says proxy war, voice crack, there's an implication that one superpower is fermenting rebellious forces within a nation state to change regimes. The problem here is Ukraine of its own free will does not want to be a part of Russia. We know this because Ukraine ousted Yanukovych and Ukraine is fighting for their existence as we speak right now. The man sat there and said America should have never gotten involved. So by your logic, us sending Ukraine weaponry and all of that to protect themselves from being annexed, that was wrong. That's basically what Dave Smith has basically just said. America aiding Ukraine in its national survival was wrong. Basically, that's what we're dealing with, an individual who's basically a Russian apologist here. Somehow, America aiding Ukraine in its national survival is wrong. Our involvement in any capacity is somehow wrong. Russia expanding is somehow okay. And he justifies all this by saying, well, we triggered it. We caused it. No, we did not. No. America's not like, this is not a proxy war. It's not a literal proxy war. Two things can be true at the same time. America gains from Ukraine fighting Russia and draining Russia's military and economy. Ukraine desperately wants to fight Russia to maintain its existence. These two things are true at the same time. But when you say proxy war, you imply that, oh man, this war wouldn't even be happening. You know, Ukraine and Russia can really come to an agreement. No, they can't. No, they can't. They can't. That's over. Let it go. Let this go. It's not a possibility. Dave Smith is a fantasy. He's a fantasy. He's a child. No. There is no peace. There is no deal. There is no reconciliation here. Vladimir's used up all of his peace deal points. It's done. This foolishness of we're in a proxy war. No, we're not. We are, but we aren't. Yes, we benefit from Ukraine fighting Russia. No, Ukraine is not being controlled by some random American-backed figurehead that the Ukrainians don't fuck with. No, they're all in it together. The Ukrainians are very much anti-Russia. They very much do not want to be a part of Russia. They very much do want to be in favor with the West. They do not want to be a part of Russia. When he says proxy war, the implication is that Ukraine's resistance is not natural. It's not grassroots. It's orchestrated. It's calculated. It's curated. This is false. It's unbelievably false. Dave Smith's entire argument hinges on like fantasy.
Vouched, you kind of snuck a straw man in there. I wouldn't say that this conflict is entirely because of NATO expansion, but to pretend like that's not a major driving factor in this conflict is to not be dealing with reality.
It's not a major driving. It's not, buddy. It's not. And how we know it's not is, number one, Russia's already been bordered by a NATO nation state, Poland. The Baltic states are part of NATO. Russia has been within ass-whooping distance for years. When they invaded Ukraine the first time, and then Minsk I was signed, there was nothing about NATO in those agreements. Nothing. There was nothing about NATO in any of those agreements. NATO became a topic of conversation as a casus belli for the war when Ukraine was invaded the first time, and they said, okay, like, we're not putting up with this shit anymore. We want to be a part of NATO. And Vladimir Putin said, oh, really? Well, I got something for your ass. The reality is, Vladimir Putin didn't just say NATO's the reason. He also said, I'm going to denazify Ukraine, which is rich from him because he hired 2 neo-Nazis to do his dirty work. He also said, I'm going to demilitarize Ukraine, which who in the fuck is he to determine whether another nation state can have a military? And then, what else did he say? He was going to denazify. He was going to demilitarize, and he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. All 3 of these things are not within his command. He cannot do that. That's illegal. To quote Dana White, that's fucking illegal. He can't do that. He just can't. And yet here we are, entertaining fantasies. Dave Smith can only bring up NATO because every other reasoning for this war from Vladimir Putin is wrong. Well, all of it's wrong. But Dave Smith cannot quote anything else besides NATO expansion. We triggered this NATO expansion. NATO. He hasn't said anything else. He will not give any agency to Russia. He will not give any agency to Ukraine. All of this is a NATO blame fest.
And this has been admitted by all of the top people on both sides. And this was why so many people within the national security apparatus in the 90s opposed the first round of NATO expansion, explicitly because this will provoke a reaction from the Russians. Through the years, the Russians have been crystal clear that Ukraine was their red line. Thanks to the greatest journalist of the 21st century, the hero Julian Assange, who is thankfully now a free man, we know that the current head of the CIA...
The greatest journalist of all time? The one who refused to release any information on Russia? Really? The guy who had information on the RNC and decided not to publish it? Julian Assange, the individual who literally prompted a member of the U.S. government, a member of the U.S. military, to steal information. That guy is a hero. That guy. The guy who, when given information on Russia, he had information on Russia. He said, I don't want to release that. Because he knew what would happen, bro. If Julian Assange released information about Russia, they would have killed him. Russia's already proven they can kill you. If they want to find you and end you, they can end you. Julian Assange is not the greatest journalist of all time. When he received information on the RNC, he didn't leak it. But you know who he did leak information on? The DNC. The man has already shown on multiple occasions he's pro-Trump, pro-Russia. The man is not a journalist. He's not. He's partisan. And I'm glad we locked his ass up, because fuck him. He's an enemy of the state. This is an individual who literally had information on Russia and decided not to release it. Is that what journalists do? No, that's not what journalists do. Dave Smith is in a fantasy land. He's not in reality. Politics is not for Dave Smith.
Hey, Burns told Condoleezza Rice this explicitly, that this was a red line, and not a red line in the way that America makes up red lines. Like Obama will say, if Assad uses a certain type of weapon on his people, that's a red line for us. It's all just ridiculous. This is a red line in a true sense, in the sense that Jack Kennedy said, putting nuclear missiles in Cuba is a red line for us. We will blow up the world if you try to do that. Vladimir Putin, and as Burns pointed out, not just Vladimir Putin, the entire Russian establishment has been unanimous on this, that they will not tolerate Ukrainian entry to NATO. And look, it's not justified or reasonable for Vladimir Putin to have launched this war, but on the scale of geopolitical demands, the demand that Ukraine cannot be a part of the American empire's military alliance was a fairly reasonable one. And we could have avoided this whole war by just committing to that.
I have a quick.
It's not a reasonable demand if you already invaded Ukraine. Like, this whole you can't bring Ukraine into NATO thing only became a massive, like, demand from Russia after the first invasion. Ukraine wanted to be a part of NATO because Russia has proven they can't be trusted to honor anything. Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum to honor Ukraine's sovereign integrity. They were incapable of keeping that promise. You think you can illegally invade Ukraine after breaking the Budapest Memorandum and you think you have negotiating power? Okay, so Putin invades illegally again, this time citing NATO membership as his concern. Well, guess what? Congrats, moron. Sweden joined. Finland joined. You don't have any, like, what leverage do you have at the negotiating table anymore as it pertains to NATO? None. None. What you about to do? You about to sit here and cry about NATO? You got 2 new NATO member states because of your shenanigans. If you want this war to, if I'm Zelensky, I'm like this. If you want this war to end, nigga, check this. We gotta join NATO. We're joining NATO. Cause Sweden and Finland joined, so nigga, it's over with. We finna join. You can have the Donbass. We don't even want them. Fuck them. Keep them. You know what? I know they want Crimea back bad. I don't know. Maybe they'll international zone Crimea or some shit. But there's gonna have to be something to happen with Crimea. But Ukraine will have to join NATO. Putin can't use that anymore. Your invasion failed. It didn't work. Putin wasn't offering peace deals when he was about to take Kyiv. It was only when Vladimir Putin wasn't winning anymore. Now all of a sudden he wanted to offer a peace deal. It's true. It was only when Vladimir Putin was struggling to make the invasion work that all of a sudden he wants a peace deal. Okay, guys. Peace deal, peace deal. He wanted a peace deal because he needed time to reorganize and re-strategize. Miles long convoys of no fuel. Vehicles just lined up for miles with no fuel getting blown up. He needed a timeout. The nigga needed a timeout. That's what that peace deal was. Dave Smith is like, bro, Dave Smith is not following this conflict. Vladimir Putin didn't want a peace deal when he was winning. He wanted a peace deal when the war became a slog, and it became really clear he was not going to have the immediate military operation victory, or special operation, that he was looking for. When it became clear that this war was actually going to be a threat to his leadership, his legacy, all of that. Then he said, okay, guys, peace deal, peace plan. But the problem is, his terms are unacceptable. So no, like, we keep slogging back to NATO, NATO, NATO. Like I said before, Russia didn't just sign the Budapest Memorandum. They also signed the NATO-Russia Founding Act. Russia acknowledged NATO's right to expand. Now they want to cry. They're already within nuclear distance, bro. They always have been. This is not new. They've always been within nuclear reach. This has always been the way it's worked. I don't know why Russia's acting brand new now. Like, nuclear bombs. Relax.
Follow up on that, Dave. So
Sure.
All things, we're dealing in the reality that we did push for the NATO expansion in 2014 and all of that considered. Is your position that there should have been like basically zero aid, military, whatever else, government aid to Ukraine after the invasion a couple of years back? Like basically just none.
Absolutely. If there was any role for the Americans to play, it would have been trying to negotiate an end to the war. Unfortunately, if you're putting me in the hypothetical of like, you can't change anything before this, but you're already here, we had probably blown all of that goodwill and there were better parties who would have been more suited for that. For example, going back to even
I want to clarify, there was no peace deal on the table until Putin was pushed back. I just want to clarify. Like, the peace deal shit started to be like pushed forward after it became clear to Putin that this war was not going to be as easy as he thought. Just putting it in context. Then he also says, America, the West, we destroyed our goodwill. Reminding you guys again, the only party here who has blown peace deal after peace deal is Russia. The only actor in this entire situation who is incapable of honoring deals is Russia. So when Dave Smith sits here and says the West has blown its trustworthiness, no. The only nation state in this entire scenario who has reliably and consistently torn up everything they've signed in an attempt to grab more land is Russia.
Summit in 2008 into the beginning of the Maidan Revolution, Germany was much more hesitant to get involved, to go down this path. There were other European countries who were kind of like, hey, let's not provoke the Russians. It's part of the reason why Ukraine didn't get a full map invitation in 2008 is the objection of the Germans. So probably someone else would have been better at it. Yes, essentially what I'm saying is that the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, the most war-hungry country in the world, the United States of America, shouldn't have been the ones at the table at all. And there might have been some goodwill from other parties who had more of an interest to avoid this catastrophe.
And if I may, I just there are elements of this that I guess don't make sense to me. First of all, the claim that America's decision making is based on it trying to expand its own geopolitical power rather than any altruistic interest. That's true, but that's also the case for all countries. That's basic IR theory. So the idea of like, well, this neocon theory of America expanding its interest, that's just nation states. Russia's doing that right now. India's doing that. China's doing that. Everyone's doing that. We're better at it because we're a superpower, of course. But that's like a fundamental rule of national like exchange. I don't think that it's really a moral question. It's a matter of material conditions in a basic Marxist sense. Who's motivated by what and where they are. In the modern world, you know, the imperial sphere of influence extends to the entire planet. You know, American jets can reach any part of the world in 24 hours. Everyone's can if they have jets. There's no we get the nation next to us, which makes me think the idea that like Ukraine is more innately in the Russian sphere of influence is, I think it's a little bit old hat. At the end of the day, the people in Ukraine were interested in closer relations with the EU, and that is ultimately what triggered everything from Euromaidan, Yanukovych fleeing the annexation of Crimea, the invasion of the Donbass following the invasion of Ukraine broadly. This is, again, a complicated situation. I don't mean to detract from the influence that Western arrogance had in it. I would never try to do that. But I do think that, like...
Vosh, stop. Like, bro. The reality is, Ukraine, of their own free will, chose to be as far from Russia as politically possible. Russia responded to that with an illegal invasion. It was so cowardly, in fact, that Russian troops didn't even have proper nation insignias. Putin didn't even want to mark his own troops. When we asked Putin, are those your troops? He said, no, that's not us. No. Nigga lying. He lied. He was invading Ukraine, annexing Crimea, purposefully making it seem like they weren't his troops, lying when asked, like, yo, are those your troops? The nigga said, hell no, it ain't. Lying. Trying to, like, twist it and, oh, NATO. No, Ukraine made a decision. Russia chose to be a bully in response, and here we are. Trying to make it seem like the West did this, the West did that. I find myself reiterating this over and over again. Russia acknowledged the right of former Soviet states to join the West. We're not expanding. These nation states are choosing to join us. When we look at the situation with Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, I don't know what more Dave Smith needs to see. The Ukrainians, like, organically do not want to be friends with Russia. We know this to be true. They're killing Russians as we speak. They're sacrificing their own lives for their own sovereignty as we speak. What more do you need to see? We have a stark contrast in Afghanistan. We couldn't make the Afghans fight. We've been there for 20 years, and they still didn't fight when the Taliban took over. We gave Ukraine some weapons or whatever, and they stood their ground. They fought back. You can't Vosh is going too soft on Dave Smith. Stop feeding into his ridiculous nonsense of NATO expansion. This is why it's so important to prep for debates, especially Ukraine debates. Because if you are pro-Ukraine, you're on the right side of history and all the facts back you up. But if you're not prepared and you're not aggressive enough, you'll sit there and give Dave Smith more room than he actually deserves.
Your roadmap for how things should have progressed from an American perspective following the 2022 invasion is misguided, because I don't think the world would be any farther from annihilation if Russia had simply marched westward, taken Kyiv, and we had a bunch of ginned up Russian soldiers right up against the border of Poland. You know, having just successfully annexed former Soviet/Russian imperial territory, you could imagine the propaganda coming out of the Kremlin about how they're reuniting their people. They're sort of like expanding the Russian interest in like a Duginist ethnic sense, you know, reclaiming the empire. I think that like the incentive structure behind that would be really bad. Like that, you're basically you're throwing chum into the water for sharks. You know, Putin is expansionist. He's been sort of like preempting this for a long time with Georgia. You know, with his behavior with the Chechens. I don't think that that would bring us any closer to peace. Now, is the current path we're on right now the best possible road? Obviously not. Nothing we ever do is the best possible road, but I think it's closer to threading that line than just letting them march westward with been. What I'm interested in, I guess, is practical solutions now, outside of just letting Ukraine get annexed, which I really don't think would have been good for world peace in the long run, even if it would have quickly ended the conflict. How do we incentivize Ukraine and Russia to come to the table and bring an end to this war? Can Ukraine regain its lost territory? I think morally it should be able to, because I don't like nations being rewarded for annexing adjacent territory. But logistically, can they? Would it be possible to end things where they are now? Would Russia keep Crimea and that just be seen as a kind of like dull historical injustice to fade away over time? And 100 years from now, people would be like, did you know Crimea used to be Ukraine? I don't know. There's so much dogmatism. And whenever you bring up like modern solutions, people go back to, I don't know, the end of the Cold War. I understand NATO is not exactly a global force for good, but what can we do now? I mean, I so rarely hear answers that are contextualized in the current moment.
Sure. Can I respond to that? Because there's a few that I want to answer your question at the end there, but just like a few things I want to point out. Number one, I think this is almost like bigger than just any political debate. There's it's a broader theme in life in general. I think anybody who's married, who's on the show or listening to the show knows this is true in personal relationships. There's a tendency to, if you're in an argument with your wife or your husband or something like that, to focus on what they did and what they did that's bothering you. But a much more healthy posture, if you're in a successful relationship, is that you also add in like, okay, well, what am I doing? How am I participating in this? What have I done that's kind of led to this situation? Generally speaking, I think that if you look at the corporate media, you're going to hear all of this talk about what Putin's done. And I think a lot of times in these debates, people can kind of claim to be like, well, I have a more nuanced position. I'm not simplifying things. I think the point of saying that, like, well, all governments are expansionist by nature, so there's no difference between the neoconservatives and, say, other groups of people. I'm not saying they're the same, but like a logical analogy, it's like, oh, well.
He's lost. I mean, like, Dave Smith is just, and by lost, I mean, he doesn't know what's going on. Dave Smith. If Russia signs the NATO-Russia Founding Act acknowledging NATO's right to accept new members, if Russia signs the Budapest Memorandum in which Ukraine gives up its nuclear weapons, and in exchange the US and Russia acknowledge and promise to honor and respect and protect Ukraine's sovereign integrity, if Russia invades Ukraine and then forces them to sign Minsk I and then breaks that, if they make them sign Minsk II, and then that falls apart because of both sides, I mean, how many times does Vladimir Putin need to show you he is not a rational actor who can be trusted with peace deals before you realize there is no, well, honey, you know, I'm really upset with what you did, but, you know, I took some time to reflect. Dave Smith is literally in a different reality. He's in a different reality. No, fuck all that. Dave Smith is just ignorant. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's delusional. Anyone who has been following Russia's track record of peace deals and contracts would know, yes, we are at, fuck all that, we are at the stage. It is so obvious that the West is not even close to being the triggering actor in this conflict. Russia has to be the irrational, unpredictable, unreliable actor it is for us to reach this point. How many legal deals does Russia get to break before Dave Smith finally says, damn, man, we really can't work with these people? We're going to have to fight them, and they're going to have to bleed both economically and physically before they realize their activity and their behavior is not acceptable and they can no longer persist. We are at that stage now where bloodshed is literally the only answer in this war. All the deals have been messed up and done up. By who? Vladimir Putin. By Russia. This whole foolishness of, you got to look at both sides. No, there is no both sides. If you sign a contract saying we honor your ability to expand your alliance, nigga, don't come crying when we expand the alliance. If you sign a contract saying, okay, if you give up the nukes, we'll honor and respect your integrity, don't come crying and invade that nation state and annex territory. You don't get to do that. No, you don't get to do that. No, you just don't. Sorry. And I keep hearing people talk about, oh, well, all these statesmen from the 90s, they warned against NATO expansion. They were wrong. And how I know they were wrong is because of the simple fact that guess who's not being invaded right now? NATO member states. Nations that are a part of NATO aren't being invaded. Turns out, even if you're weaker than Ukraine, Russia won't invade you if you're a part of NATO. Want to know why? Because the only thing Russia respects is strength. We know they don't respect peace deals because they break them all the time. The only thing they actually respect is strength. That's all they respect. That's why they want to offer peace deals all of a sudden, because they're not getting the outcome they wanted. That's why they didn't invade the Baltic states, when they probably would have had an easier time in a conventional context. In a conventional war, they would have had a much easier time invading and annexing them than Ukraine, but they knew what time it was. They knew that if they invaded the Baltics, they know what buttons are getting pressed. Article 5. Dave Smith really thinks this is a scenario where the West and Russia have tangoed their way into this situation. No. Russia stepped away from the dance floor a long time ago, and now they're shooting up the club. It's the truth.
All governments kill people, so like what Adolf Hitler's doing is just kind of the same as other governments. It's not exactly true. It's kind of different in scale and in kind. To sit here and say, and look, if we have time, we could go through the history of...
Yes. Russia's objectively worse when it comes to invading other countries. Yes, glad we can agree, Dave Smith. When Russia invades, that means they're taking your land for themselves. That means you will be under their jurisdiction. That means their ethnic people will come in and settle into your territory and act like it's their home. Yes, thank you. Finally, we can all be on the same page. I know that's not what you meant, but that is the truth. Dave Smith at the end of this is going to say something so wild that I now know he is in fact a Russian asset. I'm that paranoid, yes.
Chechnya and Georgia and all this stuff. But to zoom out a little bit, during the Cold War, we drew the line at the Elbe River, halfway through Germany. On one side was the Soviet Union, and on the other side was NATO. And we're now talking about Ukraine, and you could sit here with a straight face and say, Putin is expansionist. Okay. I mean, if that's how you want to look at it, it's like, let's just look at the actual reality of what's happening here.
So because NATO went from being on one half of Germany to soon to possibly ending up being on, well, we are on their border now, and maybe Ukraine hopefully will join NATO. We're expansionists? Dave Smith, do you not understand the difference between independent nation states saying, we want to be a part of NATO. Please, God, we do not want anything to do with Russia. Please welcome us into your alliance. We don't want to be anywhere near them. You do acknowledge the difference between that and Russia invading a country, annexing it, and moving its own ethnic people into these lands to colonize. One is independent nation states of their own free will joining an alliance in which they aren't being annexed and they aren't being colonized and they're not being killed. The other is a nation state invading other countries, killing people, taking their land, colonizing them. Like, Dave Smith, you think these two things are the same? You think that somehow or another, your counter to the Putin is expansionist statement is, well, NATO went from here to over here. Like, what the fuck, bro? Like, bro, this is what we dealing with, bro. Like, this man is a clown. This man is a clown for real. This man, Dave Smith, is truly a clown. How anybody, Vosh, You ain't shit for not prep. Yo, this is your Vosh. Why did you not prep? You later, bruh. Vosh, if you had prepped, you would have dog walked this man. You could have whooped all three of them at the same time. But because you didn't prep, bruh, Vosh, you should have been full blood sport. What's wrong with you?
It's not that Putin has been this expansionist force. Putin has been almost at every turn reacting to the expansion of the American empire.
You got it.
Oh my God! Invasion of Chechnya, invasion of Georgia. That's NATO, huh? Okay. So Vladimir Putin can break peace deals, can break treaties in which he promises, his nation state promises to uphold and honor NATO's right to expand, and he decides to break that by killing people and annexing territory and colonizing them. And that is Putin responding to NATO expansion at every turn. This debate is literally just it's insane, and Vosh is going too soft here.
And
Agency, man.
Ukraine, that's not, listen, that's just not true. It's not denying someone agency to say that they're responding to something. That doesn't make
Everyone's
any sense at
responding
all.
to everything. That's all life.
Sure.
No one just acts without you. You didn't
Yeah,
fall
but
out of
that's
a
just a
coconut
cop-out.
tree.
That's just a cop-out. That's
Well,
not, that doesn't mean anything.
You're the one providing the cop out. You're saying that like it's not possible for Putin to have like a distinctly expansionist element to his rule because
I didn't
everyone's
say
just
that.
responding to. So do you
didn't say
believe
it's not
Putin has a
possible for-
distinctly expansionist element to his rule?
Okay, no, that's not a binary. One is it's not possible.
Wait, do
for
you
this
think
to be,
he does or doesn't?
Hold on. So instead of just interrupting me, let me make the point.
Dave Smith is so slimy. Nigga, you just sat there and tried to counter Vosh's point about Putin's expansionism by saying, well, NATO went from half of Germany to all the way possibly to Ukraine, so you tried to equivocate these two things to make it seem like they're somehow or another the same, or that Vladimir Putin is just to perceive these things as the same. If Vladimir Putin thinks these two things are the same, that means Vladimir Putin is what we call an irrational actor. And we know he's an irrational actor because he's illegally invaded Ukraine twice, broken multiple peace treaties, and spreads misinformation on the daily. Dave Smith, is so slimy, and the reason why he's able to slime like this is because Vosh isn't prepared.
You just laid out a binary between is it possible he has expansionist intentions and does he have expansionist intentions? That's not a binary. There are some expansionist desires that he has. No, in fact, if you actually educate yourself on this topic, it was our CIA
You think you are the one to determine who's educated?
director who said in the Niet Means Niet memo leaked by Julian Assange that it verbatim, this was a choice that Vladimir Putin did not want to have to make. This was a choice that Russia did not want to get involved in this war.
So Vladimir Putin didn't want to make this choice, really? Niet means niet? It's funny he talks about Assange because Assange refuses to leak any information about Russia. I will summon this document again and you will be annoyed with me again. The NATO-Russia Founding Act. Again, any hoopla from Putin about you can't expand here. Y'all already signed the deal. You already signed the deal. And to make matters worse, the only nation state who continues to invade and annex in Europe is you. Russia, it's just you. The only nation state constantly annexing in Eurasia is you. It's just you. It's only you. You're the only voice you're hearing. You're going crazy looking for enemies that don't exist. I don't give a fuck if niet means niet is some document leaked somewhere from the CIA. I don't care. Russia signed a document honoring NATO's ability to quote unquote expand. NATO has done nothing to him. Zero. The only individual who is engaged in acts of violence, genocide, and colonialism in Europe is Vladimir Putin. The only one. The only one. The only one. Insane that Dave, and like I said, because Vosh didn't prepare, Dave Smith is able to quote far out their CIA documents that somehow or another override documents signed by sovereign nation states.
He made the choice. He
Correct.
made the choice to invade, to bring troops down to the Ukrainian border, to commit to multiple years of, like, come on, this is the thing. I ask you for, like, what can we do now? And immediately it's back to the Iron Curtain.
Well, hold on.
I know.
Vash,
I'm
hold on. Here's
familiar
what
with the
happened. I'm
history.
sorry,
I just
dude.
want to know in the modern context.
I get it. Actually, what happened was you made a long statement and ended with that question. And I said, let me answer that question. But first, let me deal with what you said at the beginning of your statement. And then you started interrupting me. So no, it's not that I'm not willing to answer that question. It's that I had to point out, I think, a lot of the errors that you're making. Now, if you want just to say
Vosh,
what could...
Vosh, you're letting this man, like, Vosh, come on. Vosh, he's like a little gazelle. He's so weak. You can easily destroy this individual in this debate. He looked like, bro, if this were Destiny, this debate would end halfway through. Because Dave Smith would be destroyed.
We do right now, well, look, we're going to have to be realists about this situation and admit that Ukraine is losing this war. That they're not going to drive Russia out of Crimea. That's a joke. They're not going to drive Russia out of many of the territories that they've taken right now. We should be working toward a deal, a peaceful solution, which has been on the table several times throughout this war, and it's been the West who has been trying to squash it.
Well, that's
what we should do.
Not true at all, though. You've seen, I assume you've read the deals that Putin has put through. Zelensky hasn't been particularly amenable to them himself. The narrative that the West is squashing the peace deals, which is blown up largely because of that one Boris Johnson visit early on in the conflict. Don't get me wrong, okay? The West has its own interests. There are plenty of Western leaders who would like to see the Russian armories depleted. But that doesn't mean that Ukraine would have been jumping at the bit for any of the deals Putin's been offering since the war began. And Ukraine hasn't been losing. Both countries have been stalling. This has been like a slog, and it has been since the first, after the first 3 months of the war. I don't like the narrative that Ukraine's losing, because the fact that they exist at all at this point, considering the Russian armaments aligned against them, is pretty impressive.
I mean, they're pulling guys off the streets to fight.
Oh, yeah, but and Russia has their penal colony forces with the Wagner.
To remind you guys, in June of 2024, so here are Putin's peace deal terms. In a speech on the 14th of June, 2024, Putin outlined Russia's terms for a ceasefire. He said that Russia would not negotiate unless Ukrainian forces fully withdrew from the regions claimed by Russia. Not conquered, claimed. All of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia Oblast, including the land Russia does not control. So he's saying, nigga, you're going to give me the shit I haven't even taken yet. I might not have, won this in combat yet, but you're going to give it to me if you want peace. Furthermore, he said that Ukraine has to abandon plans to join NATO. So this man sat there. He also said Putin wants Ukraine's neutral and non-nuclear status and lifting sanctions against Russia as additional conditions for peace. Give me everything and I won't end you. If you give me what I want, I won't continue my insane attempt to annex your entire country. The only thing you get is I won't kill you. I take land from you that I illegally conquered, and some of which I haven't even conquered yet. You can't join any alliances that would ensure that you cannot be invaded at any point in the future. You will give me a promise that you will be neutral, even though I'm your enemy. I border you and I want to destroy you, and you can't have any nuclear weapons, and all of the world will lift its sanctions on my country. If this isn't the most mobster, gangsterish peace deal I've ever read, I don't know what the fuck. Dave Smith is literally just retarded. Literally. Who the fuck is reading this peace offer from Putin and says, good stuff? What? What? Stop! The West keeps getting in the way. The peace deal ain't shit, and then to make matters worse, the nigga don't even keep no deal. Bruh, imagine writing a peace deal this grimy, low down, and slimy. You haven't honored any of the deals in the past. You write one this slimy, and then you about to get a deal when you're literally struggling. Putin is struggling. I know Dave Smith wants Ukraine's losing. No. Both sides are struggling. Putin's struggling. He's not gaining from this war. As of right now, it is a net loss for him. Putin offers ridiculous terms no one would ever sign, and Dave Smith is like, the West is getting in the way. No, Putin's getting in his own way. He offers nothing besides the ending of the bloodshed. No, nigga, we know and realize that bloodshed is the only way to get you to stop. We know that. That's why we're funding and aiding and supporting Ukraine, because the only way to get you to see reason is to bring about as much death and destruction for your military and economy as humanly possible. It's the only way Putin will come to the negotiating table and offer a real, logical, rational deal. Until then, we're not getting one. It's just the facts. Over there talking about the West gets in the way of peace deals. Dave Smith is a motherfucking lie.
A group like pulling from their multiple rounds of like really unpopular conscriptions, waves of immigration out of Russia. People. No, of course not. I'm not arguing that like
What's that supposed to mean? Like, oh well, we're not funding that, so and what's that like? Like this was like 0.3%. Like, yo, to remind y'all, we're sending 0.33% of our GDP to Ukraine. 0.33%. It is negligible, the amount of money we're spending on the war in Ukraine. Negligible.
Of our investment, or whether or not it's moral. You know, war makes, unfortunately, unethical decision-making of every side, including the good ones. The Allies did plenty of bad stuff during World War II. I'm only saying that it's been a slog for both sides. I don't want to see this out in like, I don't want this conflict to end in a way that's going to guarantee the conflict reemerges in 2 years. If you end up just setting the border right where the fighting lines are right now, we're going to be exactly where we were back in 2014. We're going to have a combination of like paid separatists and Russian soldiers like moving around in the Donbass. There's going to be constant exchanges of fire across the border. This needs like a real international solution. I don't know whether that means like a proper DMZ. I don't know whether that means like genuine reconciliation. Ideally for me, it would be some kind of like Hail Mary where Ukraine gets its borders back and there's like a massive like coming together between Russia and the West, and we like reopen trade and negotiations. But that's a little bit of a pipe dream. We do agree that, at least let's agree on this. If the line just freezes where it is right now, are we not guaranteeing another conflict in a few years?
I don't know that that's possible to say, to be honest.
People be pretty.
He doesn't know if it's possible because Dave Smith doesn't know shit. He doesn't know, or maybe he does know, that Russia doesn't keep its peace deals. If Russia continuously breaks deal after deal after deal, they invade Ukraine, it goes wrong, they're in a precarious position in which they're not winning, why would you offer them a deal in which they can resupply, refit, re-strategize, and invade again with no fear of Article 5 because Ukraine isn't a part of NATO? Dave Smith does not know what he is talking about. Seriously. Like, I don't know. Maybe it could. Maybe it couldn't. Are you not paying attention to Putin's lack of an ability to uphold anything? He can't uphold anything. The nigga, bruh, any peace deal from Putin is like, it's like, bro, grabbing a crayon peace deal and just like, bro, it's not worth anything. It's not worth anything. Why are we pretending that somehow or another, like, a peace deal is an option? The only scenario in which Russia is going to accept a reasonable deal, in which peace is guaranteed, is when they accept that Ukraine will join NATO. And the only way they can accept that is if they are stripped of any and all ability to wage conventional warfare. That is our only hope. Yes, fighting is literally the only answer now, and Putin has chosen to make it that way. The fact that Dave Smith does not realize that trying to force a deal right now in which Ukraine does not have any security guarantees, this is the only way. Accepting a deal where Ukraine has no security guarantee is only going to guarantee war. That's literally the only guarantee. Russia will not invade a NATO state. They are terrified. They can't even whoop Ukraine. So what the fuck? How could they possibly whoop a NATO member state? They'll get their asses whooped. They know this. This is why they're desperate for Ukraine to not join NATO. A deal will not stand and remain firm unless Ukraine is a part of NATO, and there's no getting around that.
Mad people be firing across the border.
It's not guaranteeing it. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know.
Probably, according to a lot of analysts, much, much higher than that. So to what extent can the United States, this is like higher than the NASA budget last year, the amount of foreign aid we're sending to Ukraine. Is that just the United States spending that much U.S. taxpayer money to protect every inch of the Donbass with no plan, as of right now, ostensibly no serious plan as to what a peace process would look like going forward. Is that a just outcome for the American taxpayer?
The idea that the American taxpayer knows what the fuck is going on is first and foremost the problem. Number one, like, we're spending 0.33% of our GDP, negligible amounts of money on Ukraine. Seriously. Number two, the American taxpayer may not realize it right now, but we are privileged. In World War II, we weren't able to do this. We weren't able to fund and arm the enemies of Hitler. We weren't able to do that. We weren't able to keep his army stalled and caged in this particular region. We weren't able to do that. We weren't. All we could do was sign an appeasement deal, which he immediately broke. We are privileged right now to be able to send money and weapons to Ukraine to stall in this war until Russia is incapable of continuing. That is a privilege. The American taxpayer might bitch and moan and complain, but I can guarantee you, if you asked our great-grandparents, hey, if you had the sweet deal your great-grandkids had called NATO, would you accept it? They'd probably say yes. Like, this ridiculous nonsense of the taxpayer, they don't know what the fuck is going on. They don't. If the average American knew anything about politics, Donald Trump wouldn't even be, this nigga would have never been the nominee for the Republican Party. He wouldn't. What are we talking about?
Oh, look, every dollar we give to Ukraine, we don't give to Israel. Okay, so it's like convincing your friend.
That's the best argument I've heard.
Yeah, right. It's like convincing your friend to spend money on cigarettes, not fentanyl. But I agree that Washington should have a more decisive plan. The lack of a plan, which is a common pattern, by the way, with both the United States and also Netanyahu, so not a fan of that tendency on all sides, is problematic to me. Like I said, now, if we just froze the war where it is, because of course, Putin's peace deals are basically just like forfeit the territory you've lost up until this month. They're not like real conciliatory deals, right? Which, of course, Putin wants to keep the territory that he's gained. I think that if we just took that, if we pressured Ukraine into taking that, a war would break out again within a year, 2 years maybe, because you would have like the military buildup on either side of the DMZ would be like the greatest.
Vosh, sorry. Yeah, you started the conversation talking about not wanting this to be a stalemate that goes on forever. So last year we had this much vaunted counteroffensive. At the time, there were tens of thousands of younger Ukrainian troops who were alive and were well trained. They were well equipped. They launched this massive, much anticipated counteroffensive. It was a complete disaster, led to an enormous loss of life and a loss of equipment. And so to your question of what do we do next, like, why is it the case that a new counteroffensive with older, less well-trained Ukrainian troops and less well-equipped troops would be able to succeed against a more fortified Russian military while the previous one failed? In other words, like, what is this Hail Mary that you're talking about that could change the calculation on the ground to such an extent that it's worth it to continue throwing Ukrainian men and women into the maw of this war?
Well, I don't like the term throwing, only because they are, of course, engaged in it, right? They're not just being
they're being grabbed in many cases and literally thrown.
45-year-old men.
Well, literally thrown. Yes. Ukrainian morale, or at least interest in continuing the war, is still high, but that sort of nitpick aside, I would only say, the Hail Mary is something that I hope for. It's not something that I think is guaranteed. With the introduction of ATACMS and other relatively long-range, munitions, we have the ability to sort of provide Ukraine the option to strike at depots, refineries, and facilities that are closer to the sort of back lines of the conflict. And that has had a massive effect in the past 4 or 5 months since that was introduced. I don't know whether that's going to be a game changer in the war in the long run. I hope that it is, because ultimately I do think that a conciliatory position from Russia would be a better way of ending this conflict than one in which things just freeze as they are now. The DMZ buildup along the line that people settled on right now would be catastrophic, and I think it would just guarantee further war. My hope, and this is, I know, perhaps a little naive of me, but I still have a little bit in me that hopes for this. My hope is that eventually, following the expansion of Ukraine's ability to strike at further back targets. This becomes increasingly economically untenable for Russia. There's pressure from both sides. Hey, this has gone on long enough. We literally can't keep this going anymore. We're both on fumes. And like two exhausted boxers on the 14th round, they both collapse into each other's arms. They have a Christmas Day in World War I. You know, there's a moment where for a second things get rough enough, long enough that they collapse and they just can't do it anymore. And maybe the world like breathes a sigh of peace as they finally do settle on whatever line they're at that point. I think
it's quite a dangerous game to play, man. I mean, I know it was the
it's
neocons,
all dangerous, right?
Well, sure, but I'm just saying, you know, it was the neocons' hope that if you overthrew Saddam Hussein, democracy would sweep the region, and you know that would have been nice, I guess. But you know,
this dude is so dumb. Like, bro, that's our only choice now is to literally drain Russia of its ability to fight. Because they can fight, they're willing to engage in illegal invasions, misinformation, and insane irrational demands. You have to drain them of their ability to fight in order for the civilians of Russia to say, hey, we don't want to die in Ukraine anymore. It's not a nuclear war. Let's just end this. That's our only chance. This is it. Dave Smith, you can't keep summoning up Iraq and, you know, Libya and all of this shit to try to make it seem like it's the same thing as Ukraine. It's not. Sorry, I know all you anti-establishment populists and libertarians and Tulsi Gabbard types want to act like every war we've ever been involved in is always the same. No, this is one of the few wars where we actually are the good guys finally again. And the reality is, yeah, the only way this war can end in a way in which we can breathe a sigh of no nuclear war relief is if Russia is incapable of continuing to fight and if the civilian morale of Russia is drained. It's the only way. The Russian people have to feel like Vladimir Putin's goals in Ukraine are antithetical to their desires. And until that happens, this war will continue.
The hope that, if they strike inside of Russia, that will make Russia realize that, you know, this war just has cost us a little bit too much and we sure should knock off this war business. It's quite a risky game to play. There's a couple of things that I want to. Well, let me just respond to a couple things you said there, because things that I think are pretty interesting. So, number one. Just a couple points of correction. I mean, I know I said it was a good point in jest, but no, it's not true that, you know, every dollar that goes to Ukraine is a dollar that doesn't go to Israel. I mean, as you know, we print money out of thin air, and the U.S. government is quite fine to spend well beyond its means. So no, they can deficit finance through fiat currency both of these wars at the same time. Now, what that's going to do to our dollar,
equipment too, not just money.
Sure. Yeah, no, mostly we're just bribing the military-industrial complex and sending old weapons over there. However, you know, there is, as you brought up the talk of agency before, it is true that individuals have agency. It's also true that there's such a thing as moral hazard. So if I were to just say, I'll start giving, hey, Ryan, I'm going to start giving you $1 million a month. And then you quit your job and you sit at home and I go, look, he doesn't want to work. He doesn't want to work. He wants to stay home. He doesn't want to. It's like, well, yeah, okay, there is some truth to that. But might that have, you know, the Ukrainians just want to fight. Okay, but might that have something to do with the blank check that they've received from the world? So the whole point here, right, is that, and this is true with Israel.
Oh my God. Nigga, how many checks did we sign to Afghanistan? How many? How many times? How much did we spend on Afghanistan? It didn't change anything. If a group of people want to fight, they're going to fight. Ukraine was fighting before we were sending them big package deals. It's the truth. They've been fighting since day one. The Donbass war was a fight. They've been fighting ever since the invasion in 2022. They've been fighting. Like, saying they're like, well, if we just stop sending them the money, that's not them giving up. That's them being incapable of continuing to fight. And it would probably just turn into an insurgency. Like, that's not the same thing. Like, oh my God, like, well, if we just stop sending them the money, no, it doesn't change the fact that these people have a will to fight. They don't want to be a part of Russia. They're not just fighting, well, America gave me this RPG and I guess I'll just shoot it at the Russians, I guess? Or, you know, they gave me this AT-4, they gave me this Javelin missile, I might as well just shoot it. They gave me these M4s, they gave me these M16s, if they still have M4s anyways. I think they're doing like Heckler and Koch or like M something else or whatever. Maybe it's still an M4. I don't know what the new model is from Heckler and Koch, but they gave me these new Heckler and Koch rifles. Need to shoot them. No, they're shooting the weapons at the Russians because they really don't want to be a part of Russia. Dave Smith is so conniving. If we just stopped funding them, yeah, like if you abandon them, if you abandon them, use the proper word. If you abandon them and strip them of their ability to defend their homes and their people and their sovereignty, they would be incapable of fighting. Like acting like you can somehow say, well, you know, we don't really know entirely if the Ukrainians, like, bro, yes, their sovereignty and existence and independence and lives are being threatened. Of course, if you give them the ability to fight for their life, they're gonna take it. Oh my God.
Israel and with Ukraine. What happens is that when the biggest bully in the history of the world, the US empire, says, we got your back, people get a lot braver than they otherwise would. If Israel didn't have unconditional support from the United States of America, they'd be forced to make a deal with some of their neighbors. And same with Ukraine. You know, you say like, oh, if the war ended, Ukraine would just be ready to fight Russia again in a few years without our backing? Without us arming them, without all of Europe behind them? No, they wouldn't, because they know it's a fight they couldn't possibly win.
Dave, what's a riskier game to play? I mean, I think I know what your answer would be to this.
If we just abandoned them to being conquered and annexed and genocided by Russia, all our problems would go away. Dave Smith is disgusting. Like, genuinely. If we just abandoned them and gave Russia whatever they wanted and rewarded Russia and basically told them, yeah, we're pussies. You can do whatever you want. You can invade and expand and annex. It's all good. If we just do that, the problem will go away. No, it won't. I really don't want Russia bordering Poland. I just don't. Like, not to this extent. They already do, but to the extent that they would if they were like, if they annexed Ukraine, no. Like, this man just wants to give Vladimir Putin everything. If we just stopped arming and funding Ukraine's sovereignty and we just, you know, if we just did the same thing we did in World War II, we'd have peace. Even though Russia even sat there and said, yeah, Romania's not even a real country. Basically saying, bitch, you're next. Like, what?
What's a riskier game to play? Is it, allowing Putin to expand unchecked, just to go back to the argument that Vash made earlier, or is it, escalating the war? It seems as though there are risks in both scenarios, and why is one riskier than the other at this point?
Well, look, I mean, okay, so the biggest risk that, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we should all be concerned about is the potential of nuclear war. And what's prevented the nuclear war in the past has been private negotiations, handshake agreements, and mutually assured destruction. The fact that, nobody really wants to get into a nuclear exchange because we all lose. The only time, especially now, because the current administration isn't doing handshake deals or even having conversations behind the scenes with the Russians, the only thing that could lead to a nuclear exchange, so in other words, the worst case scenario, is that Vladimir Putin actually thinks he's going to die. He thinks he's going to end up like Muammar Gaddafi. And that's the scenario where you might end up launching nukes because, screw it, bring everybody down with you. In terms of the risk of Russian expansion, I do think that Vaush made a somewhat fair point where, look, between the mix of, this is my point, not yours, but resulting in yours, between the mix of NATO joint military exercises with the Ukrainian government, the massive amounts of foreign aid, the weapons shipments that Ukraine has got, going back to before the invasion of 2022, but certainly since 2022, it has made Ukraine a tougher adversary than they otherwise would have been. Vladimir Putin famously said back in 2008, when he was warning Burns, who was the ambassador to Russia at the time, that I could be in Kiev in 2 weeks. Well, I don't think that's true anymore. I think it's a tougher battle for him than that. But then also, you think because he ends up getting the eastern part of Ukraine, that he's moving on Poland after that? I just think there's absolutely no reason to think that that's the situation. I don't think the bottom line is that...
Although he's right next to Poland, it seems like, given the history of NATO and everything else, that's pretty dangerous too.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the whole argument that all of the people who wanted to bring Ukraine into NATO made was that, well, he won't attack them if they're a NATO country. Now he's going to go after Poland. I just don't see it as being very likely. I don't think the guy's on a suicide mission. I think, as Burns told Condoleezza...
Okay, then why not bring Ukraine into NATO? If you're so confident, if you believe us when we say that Putin won't attack a NATO country, why not try to bring Ukraine into NATO? We know Ukraine is not the only nation they're going to invade. They're thinking about going after Moldova. Moldova was a part of their war plans. They literally they had a war plan involving conquering Moldova. They threatened Romania. There are other nations on the table for Russia to possibly invade. They threatened Poland too. They threatened Poland, literally. Medvedev threatens everyone all the time. Like, Dave Smith is in fantasy land.
Rice, that it was never a suicide mission. It was a choice they didn't want to have to make. That's what our intelligence was saying at the time. And so, no, I don't think that there is to pretend. Look, I think American expansionism has been more of a threat to the American Republic than anything else. The idea that Putin is somehow some type of existential threat to America, I think, is, aside from the nuclear question, just not true. I think that there has been an effort for many years now by the entire political class and the entire corporate media to demonize Vladimir Putin in oftentimes the most cartoonish, ridiculous ways. He stole the election in 2016. He's got bounties on U.S. soldiers' heads in Afghanistan. Now, from our perspective here, right, people like in, say, this alternative media space like Breaking Points is in, we all kind of laugh and mock this stuff. Like, oh, it's so ridiculous. Look at how the CIA is lying to everybody and they actually fell for it. And look how it's been exposed. But from Vladimir Putin's perspective, all of the most powerful people in the most war-hungry, powerful country in the world have essentially been saying over and over again that he declared war on us. I mean, you guys, you tell me, because I know you guys have covered this stuff a lot. How many people in the corporate media and in the intelligence apparatus said that the fake overthrowing of the elections in 2016 was worse than Pearl Harbor? They were saying out loud for years that he's declared war on us. Now, if you're Vladimir Putin, you can't just laugh at that. You have to take that seriously. It was William Perry, Bill Clinton's defense secretary, who said that Vladimir Putin believes that it is the U.S. That the U.S. policy is to overthrow Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't know for sure whether he's right about that or wrong. It wouldn't surprise me if he was right. That does sound a lot like my government. But that's the perspective that he's got to come to this from. And I think all it takes is, as I believe it was John Mearsheimer who coined the term, strategic empathy. And that's all you kind of need in this scenario. It's not empathy for its own sake. It's strategic empathy. The same thing that you need to understand the Palestinians, the same thing you need to understand Al-Qaeda, is that these, I'm not saying they're good groups. Some of them are, some of the Palestinians are good people, but some of them are terrorist organizations. Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization. Vladimir Putin is a despot. But they also can have legitimate grievances. And we ought to, if we want to ignore those, then okay, but we ignore those at our own peril.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a legitimate grievance if you sign a document saying you honor NATO. Like, I can't do this. I can't keep doing this. Like, I literally just cannot. I can't keep doing this with Dave Smith, bro. Like, I can't. Like, he's not in reality. You can't sign all these documents promising to honor all of these things and then at your own convenience say no, and I'm going to start a war. No. Sorry. No. And then, like, the only thing he can ever do to back himself up is this random statesman, this person in this person's cabinet from 20-something years ago, and this guy, he can't bring up any solid documents between sovereign nation states that agreed on anything. He has to bring up random people whose word means nothing. And this is how they argue. And Vosh is just so soft on this man. For what?
First round of NATO expansion, we have neither the political will nor the resources to actually defend these countries. How many people in America, the Norwegians, I know I'm butchering that.
That was offensive.
We do now.
Sure. Okay, well, first of all, I would just say that I don't think Ukraine has been very responsible throughout this whole thing. And certainly when their missiles hit Poland and Zelensky immediately called for preemptive attacks on Russia by the West, either lying through his teeth and claiming it was Russia who attacked Poland, or being so clueless that he hadn't even done any investigation to figure out whether it was them or not. Either way, it seems pretty irresponsible to me. But look,
he's such a hack. Like, after all the duplicitous, treacherous, war criminal shit Vladimir Putin has done, hiring a mercenary organization to fight in your war, which is fucking illegal. The man hired a neo-Nazi, Dmitry Utkin, to do his dirty work. He's recruited the Kadyrovites to fight for him in Ukraine. But Ukraine, they're the irresponsible ones because Zelensky, he mistook a missile striking Poland from his own side as a Russian missile and called for a strike on Russia. That's your Ukraine has been irresponsible take. This man's a Russian asset. He's bro. Dave Smith is part of this anti-American, pro-Russian, pro-multipolar bullshit that's gonna threaten this nation's strength. Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Dave Smith, all these bums who spread misinformation on the daily. They're going to bring about the end of the American empire, which is the most peaceful era in human history. Pax Americana is under direct threat from ridiculous characters like Dave Smith. The dude's a bum. He doesn't know anything about the topic.
Without even going back into ancient history, like just going back to very recent history. It was Jens Stoltenberg. I apologize to the Norwegians. I know I'm butchering that.
That was offensive.
He gave the whole game away last year, but he admitted that Vladimir Putin actually sent them a draft treaty and said, if you just promise to not bring Ukraine into NATO, I won't invade. And he brags that they said, no, we won't sign that. Haha.
Damn right. No, you don't give another NATO... Bro, you don't give a non-NATO member state the right to determine who can or can't join, you dumbass. Because it creates a precedent. Well, what else can Vladimir Putin dictate? What else can he decide? What if Ukraine joining NATO, actually, it would have prevented all of this? Moron. Yeah. Surprise, surprise. Not only that, Russia had already signed a document promising to not interfere and meddle in NATO's decision making. It's like... He just quotes random events between insignificant people and says the West is so evil and petty. No, Vladimir Putin's petty. No, you don't get to decide who can join NATO. That's not your choice. That's not your choice. What's next? Vladimir Putin says this person here, this nation needs to leave NATO. What's next? Vladimir Putin decides another nation state needs to leave NATO? Then what?
You didn't want NATO expansion, and look at you now. You're getting more NATO expansion. It's like, yeah, and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians dead. Like, could we at least all agree that we should have just signed that treaty? Why is it of vital strategic interest to the United States of America that we have a war guarantee with Ukraine? Like, what? How many people in America?
You're so slow. If we had just brought Ukraine into NATO sooner, this wouldn't be happening. That's the point. That's the point. It's part of the reason why you don't let Russia dictate these things, because it probably might not be in the best interest of the world. And surprise, surprise, the duplicitous, double-crossing, lying, backstabbing, low-down, dirty-ass nation-state called the Russian Federation proved themselves to be the untrustworthy group of people that they are. And now we're here. We should have acted sooner and brought Ukraine in sooner. And I'm glad we told Russia, no, we're not signing a deal with you to do that. Because Russia's proven themselves time and time again to be undeserving of any kind of contract. Any. Until they're incapable of fighting, they don't deserve any piece of paperwork. None.
It's like George Kennan said back in the first round of NATO expansion.
Here we go.
Have neither the political will nor the resources to actually defend these countries. How many people in America actually would be willing to sacrifice themselves or their children to make sure that the Donbass region is ruled by Kiev? Would you guys be willing to sacrifice your kids for that?
This is ridiculous.
As it turns out, NATO is made up of so many NATO member states that no, we do in fact actually do have the resources and the political will. Yes, we do. You want to know why? Because we summoned them in Afghanistan. We are the only nation state to call NATO to war. Us. Turns out we have this thing called an obligation and a contract that we signed where we promised to show up. I know because your pro-Russian contracts and documents and promises mean nothing, but over here they do. And we called them to fight for us on 9/11. And if we say no, we will be an international embarrassment. oh, we can call NATO to fight for us in this tiny petty war in Afghanistan, but when it came time to fight a big boy war, we didn't want to be there? Sounds like cowardice. Sounds like America can't keep its promises. Sounds like that to me. That's what it sounds like to me. As it turns out, yes, we do have the resources. NATO is a very big alliance. We have the resources. NATO can very easily whoop that ass. Russia can barely even beat Ukraine. Yes, we do have the resources. The political will? Yes, we do. We summon them to war in Afghanistan. The United States is not going to leave its allies hanging during this time. We have a full volunteer force, more than enough troops to fight. We don't need that many people. We might not even have to draft anybody because there's so many different NATO member states that a draft might not even be necessary. Might not be necessary at all. So you can keep quoting people from like 2 decades ago, but as it stands right now, yes, we do have the political will, obligation, an all-volunteer military force, and our alliance is strong enough and big enough to where we do have the collective resources to wage war. Dave Smith is just retarded.
Anyone here?
The average American wouldn't sacrifice their lives to protect East Germany or Poland either. Do you think the average American would fight for Warsaw? This rhetoric
that doesn't make
sounds,
that's
this
not a
sounds
counter.
convincing, but it's empty
No.
rhetoric.
Well,
Likewise,
no,
you're
Vouch,
still
Vouch,
not
let me
talking
explain.
about what you
Well,
want
listen,
today. No,
Vouch.
explain to me
I'm
what you want today. To
I'm going to finish my
'cause
point.
I keep talking about
Okay.
today, and then you keep talking about NATO, NATO, NATO. We know I addressed and acknowledged and agreed with the Western arrogance that
well,
led
listen,
to us.
Vouch, you're interrupting me and then claiming I'm not addressing something. So first I was just saying, could we at least all agree that a couple years ago we should have just signed that deal and committed to not bringing Ukraine into NATO and avoided this war?
No.
Couldn't
And should
Russia
we
have
do
just
that now?
invaded anyway?
Huh?
Couldn't Russia have just invaded anyway?
Sure. I guess in the worst case scenario, it would be as bad as
Like this nigga's dumb. Like they would have invaded anyway. Hoe ass nigga. Like, bruh, Russia doesn't honor anything. That's the problem with signing deals with these niggas. Signing serious deals where you sit there and say, yes, Russia, you can determine our foreign policy. You don't pay taxes, you don't do shit, but you can determine our foreign policy, Russia. You threaten us all the time, you lie, you backstab, you cheat, you kill, but it's all good though. You can determine our foreign policy. Fucking dumbass. Like, this dude's dumb. The man's a moron. Seriously. The man's literally retarded.
Vouch, that's not Vouch. That you're laughing, but there's no point to that. Yes, in the
Yes, he's laughing because your solution is stupid. Russia doesn't uphold deals. Like, bro. Oh my god, bro. Like, and this man had the audacity to say to Vosh, if you educated yourself on this topic, you're the uneducated one. Russia, of all nations, for damn sure should not be able to dictate American foreign policy, especially a nation state that cannot uphold agreements. They could invade anyway. Vladimir Putin has, for all of the invasions he's done, all of them were based in false claims, misinformation. If someone keeps waging wars based on bullshit, you probably shouldn't sign binding agreements with them. And it sets a precedent where other nation states can be like, well, we're not doing this unless you promise us this impossible fucking deal. Insane.
worst
I
case
agree.
scenario,
There's no
we could have
point to this
still
line of
ended.
inquiry. Let's talk about what we can
No,
do
no.
now.
Okay, let me just make my
Please.
point. Okay, Vash, let me just make.
He can't talk about what to do now. He has no solution. He doesn't have one. The reason why he doesn't have one is because his entire argument is based on fantasy. When you're not even in the same reality as the rest of the world, the solutions you're gonna, if you can even come up with one, are gonna be bullshit. They're not even gonna work.
My point, instead of this constant interrupting. Listen, yes, in the worst case scenario, I suppose it could have gone as bad as it did in this scenario, but obviously the overwhelming odds are that it wouldn't have come to this. Now,
How?
in terms of your point of saying like, well,
oh my god, how? When Russia breaks every fucking deal, how in the fuck could you possibly say it more than likely wouldn't? This is what our country is dealing with. People like Dave Smith who are becoming unbelievably popular by spreading misinformation and selling the American people foreign policy ideas that aren't real. This is the reason why Donald Trump is sitting there saying, I'll end the war within 24 hours. You want to know why he has to do that? Because Tucker Carlson sat there and lied to the Republican voting base for so goddamn long about Ukraine that if Trump even promises a single penny to Ukraine, the Republican voting base will start screaming and hooping and hollering, not because they know anything, but because they've been misled for so long by characters like Tulsi, Tucker, Smith, and RFK. That politicians can't even do the right thing anymore because voters are becoming contaminated with misinformation. Sitting there talking about some, it probably wouldn't have gone wrong. How? When they can't keep a deal. How? When every invasion has been illegal. How? When every single invasion has been justified with misinformation and illegal casus belli. Like, how? How? Dave Smith, how? Oh my God.
The average American isn't willing to go die for Germany or Poland. Okay, but so why are we adding more of these countries, especially when our own intelligence community is telling us that the risk of adding this other nation that Americans care about even less, the risk of it could result in this war, very explicitly, blatantly saying that. Now, look, again, I do think I actually answered this question pretty clearly, pretty early on in this. But right now, what we should do, being educated by what's happened in the very recent past, is to go, hey, America is going to announce that we will pull all of our support for Ukraine in this war under the condition that Vladimir Putin accepts some type of peace proposal that's going to look like not quite as good as Ukraine would have gotten if they had taken the deal that Boris Johnson broke up, but it's going to look like...
What deal? You don't have any evidence of what... Bro, this is not true. There was no deal broken by Boris Johnson. None. If the Ukrainians wanted to sign a deal, they would have signed one. You can't make them fight.
Vladimir Putin obviously keeping Crimea, obviously keeping some of the territories that he already has control of, and in exchange for him ending the war, we promise that Ukraine will not be admitted into NATO.
Okay. So we give them illegally annexed territory, and then we promise that, whenever you decide to invade again, Ukraine won't be strong enough to fight back. I'll stop. This is like someone coming into your business, beating the shit out of you and stealing your stuff, and they say, you know what, man, if you pay us enough money, so much money that you can't even pay your bills anymore, you know what? If you pay us enough money, so much money that you can't even pay your bills anymore, you know what? You know what, buddy? We'll stop coming in here and whooping your ass. We'll stop. Don't you want peace? Don't you want an end to the violence? This is the exact same thing. Unless Ukraine has some kind of security guarantee, there is never going to be a deal. Dave Smith, because he's delusional, does not understand this. He's childlike.
So here's
that
a good
deal is
point.
still possible.
Let's talk about
Listen,
that.
let me just add one final point to this, and then you can respond however you want. Understand something here. The United States of America holds all of the chips. We could offer Vladimir Putin something that would probably get him to do whatever we wanted him to do.
No, we don't. We don't hold all the chips. Again, Dave Smith, a child. If America held all the chips, there would have never been a disastrous pullout in Afghanistan. Again, if we held all the chips, Iraq would be a democratic, Western-friendly nation. There would have never been any ISIS. Again, if we held all the chips, Afghanistan would be a democratic haven of female freedom and LGBTQ freedom and female literacy, but instead it's not. We don't hold all the cards. If we did, there wouldn't be a war in Ukraine. If we did, Ukraine would be winning right now. We don't hold all the cards, and no, we cannot offer Vladimir Putin anything right now. We can't. This false idea that Americans have, that America has all the power in the world to make anything happen, we don't. That's why the war is happening, because Vladimir Putin's demands are not reasonable. He wants everything in exchange for nothing. I promise to stop killing these people if you give me the land that I took illegally, and you give me land that I haven't even conquered yet illegally. And in exchange, I'll stop killing these people, and they don't get to have any security guarantees if I choose to invade them in the future. That is not a peace deal. That is blackmail. That is mobsterism and gangsterism. That is not a peace deal. No, the United States does not have the ability to give Vladimir Putin anything he wants. We don't, because there are guarantees and demands that we have, that we need, that Vladimir Putin will not provide. No, it don't work like that. We don't have all the cards. I wish we did, but we don't.
And you know what that is, the ultimate crowning jewel for him. How about we leave NATO?
Bruh. I'm about to turn this off. I'm about to turn this shit off, bro. So you illegally invade a nation state, break multiple treaties, lie and spread misinformation, turn our own citizens against our own foreign policy. And as a shut the fuck up. And as a reward, what you will receive is the strongest, most powerful nation in the world, leaving the strongest and most powerful military alliance in the world, and possibly causing so much chaos in that alliance that it completely dissolves. At this stage in the game, I really do believe Dave Smith is a Russian asset.
You end this war right
Come
now,
on.
America will withdraw from NATO.
All
Why
right.
not? Listen, we
this is like
created NATO.
silly
What-
internet rhetoric that will get
No,
you
it's
laughed
not.
out of any
It's
political
not.
conference.
Vouch.
Yeah.
No,
We're
Vouch,
gonna
this is
leave
silly.
NATO.
Th-
No, this
yeah.
is
I
like
mean, the
Jim,
former
this is like for
president
Twitter
says stuff
likes,
like that.
you know.
Yeah, literally the former-
What if
She funny as the former president. She funny as I ain't gonna lie, that was funny.
we
President asked
left
the
a
question.
military? What if we left the key military alliance on the planet to incentivize a despot on the other side of the world to not invade the country they
It's
unjustly invaded?
such not.
Yo, I ain't gonna lie, Dave Smith, just turn off the camera, bro. Turn off the camera. Vosh, nigga, Vosh, you should have been moving like this from the beginning of the debate, G. You should have been coming at it like this from the first minute. You should have came out like McGregor, just spinning back kick, like, bro. You should have came out like, bro. Come on, bro. Why you, bro? Vosh, why you so like this nigga, bro? Vosh, come on, bro. Dave Smith is retarded.
It's
Listen,
no.
NATO was created.
It's
hold on.
ginned up rhetoric. It's good for Twitter likes. It's great for the ultra libertarians who are all like keenly interested in Yanukovych's like electoral legitimacy. It's not reality. You
okay.
suggested
You're making no points here.
suggested that we offered a
No, he made a point. You're offering that the United States basically dissolves the most powerful military alliance in the world, cedes its geopolitical influence in the biggest European war since World War II, and removes itself from the geopolitical playing field. Also, Vladimir Putin can maybe, possibly stop his illegal invasion, second illegal invasion built on lies. Dave Smith, like, if you don't understand the stupidity and the inherent stupidity in what you said, you're like, I can't help you, G. Vosh can't help you. Like, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with. We are dealing with stupidity. And then the fucked up part about it is if you try to combat this shit, you got to go through 1,000,000 miles of hard work and research to try to say, guys, come on, don't believe this shit. It's not true. Here's like 20 pieces of evidence. All people like Dave Smith have to do is lie once, and they have the minds of the public. In order to pull those minds back, you've got to throw 1,000,000 pieces of information, and it still won't even work on the majority of them, because most people don't want to have to hear that they're wrong. It's ridiculous.
Pull support from Ukraine in exchange for a peace deal. Okay, fine. So let's finally talk about that then. What happens then if that divestment occurs? Naturally, there's a DMZ. Of course, there would be, right? And then you have a buildup of the remaining Ukrainian troops and Russia's troops on both sides. Don't you think it's likely that given a peace deal that takes place under those circumstances, eventually, like, the conflict would spark again? And this time, what are we going to do? Provide aid to Ukraine again when Russia
Okay, so let
invades
me-
again?
But is the alternate
let me respond to
rolling
all of that.
conflict, like
Well, hold on.
the ongoing slog for another couple of years? I mean,
That's the only choice. That is our only choice. Yes, we are at the stage right now in this conflict where the only answer is war. No more papers, no more documents, no more none of that. Vladimir Putin has proven himself to be incapable of honoring anything. The only thing Russia understands right now is bloodshed. The only way in which the Russian people are probably going to say, hey, Vlad, we don't really like this war. I believe the most important thing to Vladimir Putin is Putin. The only thing important to him is himself. If he really believes that the Russian people might eject him from office if he doesn't end this war, he'll end it. Oh, he'll end it. 100% he'll end it. The only way out of this that I can see right now is if Putin says, okay, this war's become a little bit too much. You can have Ukraine in NATO, but I'm keeping the Donbass and I'm keeping Crimea. All right, cool. You got it. We don't even want the Donbass, no way. Of course, Ukraine wants it, but we're going to have to pressure them to accept the deal. We're not going to get that deal until Russia realizes it does not have the political will of its citizenship to continue to fight the war. That's it. This debate is a prime example of why it's so important to research before you debate and to research as an independent viewer, because Dave Smith literally coasted through this entire debate off of misinformation and off of quoting random statesmen who were wrong. As it turns out, if you bring a nation state into NATO, Russia won't attack them. If we had done this with Ukraine sooner, we wouldn't be dealing with this right now. Dave Smith is just wrong. No, we did not promise to never expand. Yes, Russia signed a contract acknowledging our right to expand NATO. This is just this is just insane. Voss should have went harder. Dave Smith is absolutely full of absolute shit as it pertains to this debate. And that's it. Let me know what y'all think. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm done.